This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 14. By and by, when we got up, we turned over the truck the gang had stole off of the wreck and found boots and blankets and clothes and all sorts of other things and a lot of books and a spyglass and 3 boxes of cigars. We hadn't ever been this rich before in neither of our lives. The cigars was prime. We laid off all the afternoon in the woods talking, and me reading the books and having a general good time. I told Jim all about what happened inside the wreck and at the ferry boat, and I said these kinds of things was adventures. Well, he said he didn't want no more adventures. He said that when I went into Texas and he crawled back to get on the raft and found her gone, he nearly died, because he judged it was all up with him any way it could be fixed. For if he didn't get saved, he would get drowned, and if he did get saved, whoever saved him would send him back home so as to get the reward, and then Miss Watson would sell him south, sure. Well, he was right. He was most always right. He had an uncommon level head for a nigger. I read considerable to Jim about kings and dukes and earls and such, and how gaudy they dressed, and how much style they put on, and called each other Your Majesty and Your Grace and Your Lordship and so on, instead of Mister. And Jim's eyes bugged out, and he was interested. He says, "I didn't know they was so many of 'em. I ain't heerd about none of 'em scarcely but old King Solomon, unless you counts dem kings what's in a pack of cards. How much do a king get?" "Get?" I says. "Why, they get $1,000 a month if they want it. They can have just as much as they want. Everything belongs to them." "Ain't that gay? And what they got to do, Huck?" "They don't do nothing." "Why, how you talk. They just set round." "No, is that so?" "Of course it is. They just sit around, except maybe when there's a war, then they go to the war. But other times they just lazy around or go hawking, just hawking and Shh. Did you hear a noise? We skipped out and looked, but it warn't nothing but the flutter of a steamboat's wheel way down, coming round the point, so we come back. "Yes," says I, "and other times when things is dull they fuss with the Parliament, and if everybody don't go just so, they wax their heads off, but mostly they hang around the harem." "Round a which?" "Harem." "What's the harem?" "The place where they keeps his wives. Don't you know about the harem? Solomon had one. He had about 1,000,000 wives." "Why, yes, that's so. I done forgot it. A harem's a boarding house, I reckon. Most likely they has rackety times in the nursery. And I reckon the wives quarrels considerable, and that creased the racket. Yet they say Solomon the wisest man that ever lived. I don't take no stock in that. Because why? Would a wise man want to live in the midst of such a blim-blammin' all the time? No, 'deed he wouldn't. A wise man 'd take and build a boiler factory, and then he could shut down the boiler factory when he want to rest." "Well, he was the wisest man anyway, because the widow she told me so her own self." "I don't care what the widow say. He warn't no wise man nuther. He had some of the dead fetchin'est ways I ever see. Does you know about that child that he was going to chop in two?" "Yes, the widow told me all about it." "Well, then, warn't that the beatin'est notion in the world? You just take and look at it for a minute. There's the stump. There. That's one of the women. Here's you. That's the other one. I's Solomon, an' dish yer dollar bill's de chile. Bofe of you claims it. What does I do? Does I shin around amongst de neighbors an' find out which un you de bill do belong to, an' do hand it over to the right one all safe an' sound, de way dat anybody dat had any gumption would? No, I take an' whack de bill in two, an' give half of it to you, an' de yuther half to de yuther woman. Dat's de way Solomon was gwine to do wid de chile. Now I want to ask you, what's de use of dat half a bill? Can't buy nuthin' wid it. An' what use is half a chile? I wouldn't give a dern for a million of 'em.
But hang it, Jim, you've clean missed the point. Blame it, you've missed it 1,000 mile.
Who, me? Go long. Don't talk to me 'bout your points. I reckon I know sense when I sees it, an' there ain't no sense in sich doin's as dat. De dispute warn't about half a chile. De dispute was about a whole chile, an' de man dat think he kin settle a dispute about a whole chile wid a half a chile don't know enough to come in out of de rain. Don't talk to me 'bout Solomon, Huck. I knows him by de back.
But I tell you, you don't get the point.
Blame de point. I reckon I knows what I knows. An' mind you, de real pint is down furder. It's down deeper. It lays in the way Solomon was raised. You take a man that's got only 1 or 2 chillun. Is dat man gwine to be wasteful of chillun? No, he ain't. He can't afford it. He knows how to value 'em. But you take a man that's got about 5 million chillun running round the house, and it's different. He as soon chop a child in two as a cat. There's plenty more. A child or two more or less warn't no consequence to Solomon that'd fetch him.
I never see such a nigger. If he got a notion in his head once, there wa'n't no getting it out again. He was the most down on Solomon of any nigger I ever see. So I went to talking about other kings and let Solomon slide. I told about Louis XVI that got his head cut off in France long time ago, and about his little boy the Dolphin that would have been a king, but they took and shut him up in jail, and some say he died there.
Poor little chap.
But some says he got out and got away and come to America.
That's good, but he'll be pretty lonesome. There ain't no kings here, is they, Huck?
No.
Then he can't get no situation. What's he going to do?
Well, I don't know. Some of them gets on the police, and some of them learns people how to talk French.
Why, Huck, don't the French people talk the same way we does?
No, Jim. You couldn't understand a word they said. Not a single word.
Well, now, I be ding busted. How do dat come?
I don't know, but it's so. I got some of their jabber out of a book. Suppose man was to come to you and say, "Parlez-vous Francie?" What would you think?
I wouldn't think nothin'. I'd take and bust him over the head. That is, if he warn't white. I wouldn't allow no nigger to call me dat.
Shucks, it ain't calling you anything. It's only saying, "Do you know how to talk French?"
Well, then, why couldn't he say it?
Why, he is a saying it. That's a Frenchman's way of saying it.
Well, it's a plain ridiculous way, and I don't want to hear no more about it. There ain't no sense in it.
Looky here, Jim. Does a cat talk like we do?
No, a cat don't.
Well, does a cow?
No, a cow don't nother.
Does a cat talk like a cow? Or a cow talk like a cat?
No, they don't.
It's natural and right for 'em to talk different from each other, ain't it?
Course.
And ain't it natural and right for a cat and a cow to talk different from us?
Why, most surely it is.
Well, then, why ain't it natural and right for a Frenchman to talk different from us? You answer me that.
Is a cat a man, Huck?
No.
Well, then, there ain't no sense in a cat talking like a man. Is a cow a man? Or is a cow a cat?
No, she ain't either of 'em. Well, den, she ain't got no business to talk like either one of the other of 'em. Is a Frenchman a man?
Yes.
Well, den, dad blame it, why don't he talk like a man? You answer me dat.
I see it weren't no use wasting words. You can't learn a nigger to argue. So I quit. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, Chapter 15. We judged that 3 nights more would fetch us to Cairo, at the bottom of Illinois, where the Ohio River comes in, and that was what we was after. We would sail the raft and get on a steamboat and go way up the Ohio amongst the free states, and then be out of trouble. Well, the second night a fog begun to come on, and we made for a towhead to tie to, for it wouldn't do to try to run in a fog. But when I paddled ahead in the canoe with the line to make fast, there weren't anything but little saplings to tie to. I passed the line around one of them right on the edge of the cut bank, but there was a stiff current, and the raft came booming down so lively she tore it out by the roots, and away she went. I see the fog closing down. It made me so sick and scared I couldn't budge for most half a minute, it seemed to me. And then there weren't no raft in sight. You couldn't see 20 yards. I jumped into the canoe and run back to the stern and grabbed the paddle and set her back a stroke. But she didn't come. I was in such a hurry I hadn't untied her. I got up and tried to untie her, but I was so excited my hands shook so I couldn't hardly do anything with them. As soon as I got started, I took out after the raft, hot and heavy, right down the towhead. That was all right as far as it went, but the towhead warn't 60 yards long, and the minute I flew by the foot of it, I shot out into the solid white fog, and had no more idea which way I was going than a dead man. Thinks I, it won't do to paddle. First I know I'll run into the bank or a towhead or something. I got to sit still and float, and yet it's mighty fidgety business to have to hold your hand still at such a time. I whooped and listened. Away down there somewheres I hear a small whoop. Up comes my spirits. I went tearing after it, listening sharp to hear it again. The next time it come I see I warn't heading for it, but heading away to the right of it. And the next time I was heading away to the left of it, not gaining on it much neither. For I was flying around, this way and that and the other, but it was going straight ahead all the time. I did wish the fool would think to beat a tin pan and beat it all the time, but he never did, and it was the still places between the whoops that was making the trouble for me. Well, I fought along, and directly here's the whoop behind me. I was tangled good now. That was somebody else's whoop, or else I was turned around. I throwed the paddle down. I heard the whoop again. It was behind me yet, but in a different place. It kept coming. It kept changing its place, and I kept answering till by and by it was in front of me again, and I knowed the current had swung the canoe's head downstream, and I was all right if that was Jim and not some other raftsman hollering. I couldn't tell nothing about voices in a fog, for nothing don't look natural nor sound natural in a fog. The whooping went on, and in about a minute I come a booming down on a cut bank with smoky ghosts of big trees on it, and the current throwed me off to the left and shot by, amongst a lot of snags that fairly roared, the current was tearing by them so swift. In another second or two it was solid white and still again. I sat perfectly still then, listening to my heart thump, and I reckon I didn't draw a breath while it thumped 100. I just give up then. I knowed what the matter was. That cut bank was an island, and Jim had gone down the other side of it. It warn't no towhead that you could float by in 10 minutes.
It had the big timber of a regular island. It might be 5 or 6 miles long and more than half a mile wide. I kept quiet, with my ears cocked, about 15 minutes, I reckon. I was floating along a course, 4 or 5 miles an hour, but you don't ever think of that. No, you feel like you're laying dead still on the water, and if a little glimpse of a snag slips by, you don't think to yourself how fast you're going, but you catch your breath and think, my, how that snag's tearing along. If you think it ain't dismal and lonesome out in the fog that way by yourself in the night, you try it once. You'll see. Next, for about half an hour, I whoops now and then. At last I hears the answer a long ways off, and tries to follow it, but I couldn't do it. And directly I judged I got into a nest of towheads, for I had little dim glimpses of them on both sides of me, sometimes just a narrow channel between, and some that I couldn't see I knowed was there because I hear the wash of the current against the old dead brush and trash that hung over the banks. Well, I warn't long loosing the whoops down amongst the towheads, and I only tried to chase them a little while anyway, because it was worse than chasing a jack-o'-lantern. You never know to sound dodge around so, and swap places so quick, so much. I had to claw away from the bank pretty lively 4 or 5 times to keep from knocking the islands out of the river, and so I judged the raft must be butted into the bank every now and then, or else it would get further ahead and clear out of hearing. It was floating a little faster than what I was. Well, I seemed to be in the open river again by and by, but I couldn't hear no sign of a whoop nowheres. I reckon Jim had fetched up on a snag maybe, and it was all up with him. I was good and tired, so I laid down in the canoe and said I wouldn't bother no more. I didn't want to go to sleep, of course, but I was so sleepy I couldn't help it, so I thought I would just take one little cat nap. But I reckon it was more than a cat nap, for when I waked up, the stars was shining bright, the fog was all gone, and I was spinning down a big bend stern first. First, I didn't know where I was. I thought I was dreaming, and when things begun to come back to me, they seemed to come up dim out of last week. It was a monstrous big river here, with the tallest and the thickest kind of timber on both banks, just a solid wall, as well as I could see by the stars. I looked away downstream and seen a black speck on the water. I took after it, but when I got to it, it warn't nothing but a couple of saw logs made fast together. Then I see another speck and chased that, then another, and this time I was right. It was the raft. When I got to it, Jim was setting there with his head down between his knees, asleep, with his right arm hanging over the steering oar. The other oar was smashed off, and the raft was littered up with leaves and branches and dirt. So she'd had a rough time. I made fast and laid down under Jim's nose on the raft, and began to gap and stretch my fists out against Jim and says, "Hello, Jim, have I been asleep? Why didn't you stir me up?" "Goodness gracious, is that you, Huck? And you ain't dead? You ain't drownded? You's back again? It's too good for true, honey. It's too good for true. Let me look at you, child. Let me feel of you. No, you ain't dead. You's back again, live and sound. Just the same old Huck. The same old Huck, thanks to goodness. What's the matter with you, Jim? You been a-drinking?" "Drinking? Has I been a-drinking? Has I had a chance to be a-drinking?" "Well, then, what makes you talk so wild?" "How does I talk wild? How? Why, hain't you been talking about my coming back and all that stuff as if I'd gone away? Huck, Huck Finn, you look me in the eye. Look me in the eye. Hain't you been gone away?" "Gone away? Why? What in the nation do you mean? I ain't been gone anywheres. Where would I go to?" "Well, looky here, boss. There's something wrong, there is. Is I me, or who is I? Is I here, or where is I? Now that's what I wants to know. Well, I think you're here plain enough, but I think you're a tangle-headed old fool, Jim. I is I? Well, you answer me dis. Didn't you tote out the line in the canoe for to make fast to the towhead? No, I didn't. What towhead? I ain't seen no towhead. You ain't seen no towhead? Looky here. Didn't you line pull loose and the raft go a-hummin' down the river and leave you and the canoe behind in the fog? What fog? Why, the fog. The fog that's been around all night. And didn't you whoop? And didn't I whoop? Till we got mixed up in the islands and one of us got lost and the other one was just as good as lost, 'cause he didn't know where he was? And didn't I bust up agin a lot of them islands and have a terrible time and most get drownded? Now ain't that so, boss? Ain't it so? You answer me dat. Well, this is too many for me, Jim. I hain't seen no fog, nor no islands, nor no troubles, nor nothin'. I've been settin' here talkin' with you all night till you went to sleep about 10 minutes ago, and I reckon I done the same. You couldn't have got drunk in that time, so of course you been dreamin'. Dad, fetch it, how's I gwine to dream all that in 10 minutes? Well, hang it all, you did dream it, 'cause there didn't any of it happen. But, Huck, it's all just as plain to me as it don't make no difference how plain it is. There ain't nothin' in it. I know, because I've been here all the time. Jim didn't say nothin' for about 5 minutes, but sat there studyin' over it. Then he says, "Well, then, I reckon I did dream it, Huck. But dog my cats if it ain't the powerfulest dream I ever see. And I ain't ever had no dream before that's tired me like this one." Oh, well, that's all right, because a dream does tire a body like everything sometimes. But this one was a staving dream. Tell me all about it, Jim. So Jim went to work and told me the whole thing right through, just as it happened, only he painted it up considerable. Then he said he must start in and interpret it, 'cause it was sent for a warning. He said the first towhead stood for a man that would try to do us some good, but the current was another man that would get us away from him. The whoops was warnings that would come to us every now and then, and if we didn't try hard to make out to understand 'em, they'd just take us into bad luck, instead of keeping us out of it. The lot of towheads was troubles we was going to get into with quarrelsome people and all kinds of mean folks, but if we minded our business and didn't talk back and aggravate them, we would pull through and get out of the fog and into the big clear river, which was the Free States, and wouldn't have no more trouble. It had clouded up pretty dark just after I got onto the raft, but it was clearing up again now. "Oh, well, that's all interpreted well enough as far as it goes, Jim," I says. "But what does these things stand for?" It was the leaves and rubbish on the raft and the smashed door. You could see them first rate now. Jim looked at the trash, and then looked at me, and back at the trash again. He got the dream fixed so strong in his head that he couldn't seem to shake it loose and get the facts back into its place again right away. But when he did get the thing straightened around, he looked at me steady without ever smiling and says, "What did they stand for? I's gwine to tell you. When I got all wore out with work, and wid the callin' for you, and went to sleep, my heart was most broke because you was lost, and I didn't keer no more what become of me and the raft. And when I wake up and find you back again all safe and sound, the tears come, and I could have got down on my knees and kissed your foot, I's so thankful. And all you was thinking about was how you could make a fool of old Jim with a lie. That truck there is trash, and trash is what people is that puts dirt on the head of their friends and makes them ashamed." Then he got up slow and walked to the wigwam and went in there without saying anything but that. But that was enough. It made me feel so mean I could almost kissed his foot to get him to take it back.
It was 15 minutes before I could work myself up to go and humble myself to a nigger. But I done it, and I warn't ever sorry for it afterwards neither. I didn't do him no more mean tricks, and I wouldn't have done that one if I'd have knowed it would make him feel that way. End of chapter.
High standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience,
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 16. We slept most all day and started out at night, a little ways behind a monstrous long raft that was as long going by as a procession. She had 4 long sweeps at each end, so we judged she carried as many as 30 men likely. She had 5 big wigwams aboard, wide apart, and an open campfire in the middle, and a tall flagpole at either end. There was a power of style about her. It amounted to something being a raftsman on such a craft as that. We went drifting down into a big bend, and the night clouded up and got hot. The river was very wide and was walled with solid timber on both sides. Couldn't see a break in it hardly ever, or a light. We talked about Cairo and wondered whether we would know it when we got to it. I said likely we wouldn't, because I'd heard there weren't but about a dozen houses there, and if they didn't happen to have them lit up, how was we going to know we was passing a town? Jim said if the 2 big rivers joined together there, that would show. But I said maybe we might think we was passing the foot of an island and coming into the same old river again. That disturbed Jim, and me too. So the question was, what to do? I said, paddle ashore the first time a light showed and tell them Pap was behind, coming along with a trading scow, and was a green hand at the business, and wanted to know how far it was to Cairo. Jim thought it was a good idea, so we took a smoke on it and waited. There weren't nothing to do now but to look out sharp for the town, and not pass it without seeing it. He said he'd be mighty sure to see it, because he'd be a free man the minute he seed it. But if he missed it, he'd be in a slave country again and no more show for freedom. Every little while he jumps up and says, "There she is." But it warn't. It was jack-o'-lanterns or lightning bugs. So he sat down again and went to watching same as before. Jim said it made him all over trembly and feverish to be so close to freedom. Well, I can tell you it made me all over trembly and feverish too, to hear him, because I'd begun to get through my head that he was most free, and who was to blame for it? Why, me. I couldn't get that out of my conscience, no how nor no way. It got to troubling me so I couldn't rest. I couldn't stay still in one place. It hadn't ever come home to me before what this thing was that I was doing. But now it did, and it stayed with me and scorched me more and more. I tried to make out to myself that I warn't to blame, because I didn't run Jim off from his rightful owner. But it warn't no use. Conscience up and says every time, "But you knowed he was running for his freedom, and you could have paddled ashore and told somebody." That was so. I couldn't get around that no way. That was where it pinched. Conscience says to me, "What had poor Miss Watson done to you that you could see her nigger go off right under your eyes and never say one single word? What did that poor old woman do to you that you could treat her so mean? Why, she tried to learn you your book, she tried to learn you your manners, and she tried to be good to you every way she knowed how. That's what she done." I got to feeling so mean and so miserable, I most wished I was dead. I fidgeted up and down the graft, abusing myself to myself, and Jim was fidgeting up and down past me. But neither of us could keep still. Every time he danced around and said, "There's Cairo," it went through me like a shot. and I thought if it was Cairo, I reckon I would die of miserableness. Jim talked out loud all the time while I was talking to myself. He was saying how the first thing he would do when he got to a free state, he would go to saving up money and never spend a single cent, and when he got enough he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm close to where Miss Watson lived, and then they would both work to buy the 2 children, and if their master wouldn't sell them, they'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. It most froze me to hear such talk. He wouldn't ever dare to talk such talk in his life before. Just see what a difference it made in him the minute he judged he was about free. It was according to the old saying, give a nigger an inch and he'll take an L. Thinks I, this is what comes of my not thinking. Here was this nigger, which I had as good as helped to run away, coming right out flat-footed and saying he would steal his children that belonged to a man I didn't even know, a man that hadn't ever done me no harm. I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him. My conscience got to stirring me up hotter than ever, until at last I says to it, let up on me. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at the first light and tell. I felt easy and happy and light as a feather right off. All my troubles was gone. I went to looking out sharp for a light and sort of singing to myself. By and by one showed. Jim sings out, we's safe, Huck, we's safe. Jump up and crack your heels. That's the good old Cairo at last. I just knows it. I says, I'll take the canoe and go and see, Jim. It mightn't be, you know. He jumped and got the canoe ready and put his old coat in the bottom for me to set on and gave me the paddle. And as I shoved off, he says, pretty soon I'll be a-shouting for joy, and I'll say, it's all on accounts of Huck. I was a free man, and I couldn't ever been free if it hadn't been for Huck. Huck done it. Jim won't ever forget you, Huck. You's the best friend Jim's ever had, and you's the only friend old Jim's got now. I was paddling off, all in a sweat to tell on him. But when he says this, it seemed to kind of take the tuck all out of me. I went along slow then, and I warn't right down certain whether I was glad I started or whether I warn't. When I was 50 yards off, Jim says, there you goes, the old true Huck, the only white gentleman that ever kept his promise to old Jim. Well, I just felt sick. But I says, I got to do it. I can't get out of it. Right then along comes a skiff with 2 men in it with guns, and they stopped and I stopped. One of them says, what's that yonder? Piece of a raft, I says. Do you belong on it? Yes, sir. Any men on it? Only one, sir. Well, there's 5 niggers run off tonight up yonder, above the head of the bend. Is your man white or black? I didn't answer up prompt. I tried to, but the words wouldn't come. I tried for a second or two to brace up and out with it, but I warn't man enough. Hadn't the spunk of a rabbit. I see I was weakening, so I just give up trying and up and says, he's white. I reckon we'll go and see for ourselves. I wish you would, says I, because it's Pap that's there, and maybe you'd help me tow the raft ashore where the light is. He's sick, and so is Mam and Mary Ann. Oh, the devil. We're in a hurry, boy. But I suppose we've got to. Come, buckle to your paddle, and let's get along. I buckled to my paddle, and they laid to their oars. When we had made a stroke or two, I says, Pap'll be mighty much obleeged to you, I can tell you. Everybody goes away when I want them to help me tow the raft ashore, and I can't do it by myself. Well, that's infernal mean. Odd, too. Say, boy, what's the matter with your father? It's well, it ain't anything much. They stopped pulling. It warn't but a mighty little ways to the raft now. One says, Boy, that's a lie. What is the matter with your pap? Answer up square now, and it'll be the better for you. I will, sir. I will, honest. But don't leave me, please. It's the gentlemen, if you only pull ahead and let me heave you the headline, you won't have to come near the raft. Please do." "Set her back, John, set her back," says one. They back water. "Keep away, boy, keep to leeward. Confound it, I just expect the wind has blowed it to us. Your pap's got the smallpox, and you know it precious well. Why didn't you come out and say so? Do you want to spread it all over?" "Well," says I, a blubbering, "I've told everybody before, and they just went away and left us." "Poor devil, there's something in that. We are right down sorry for you, but well, hang it, we don't want the smallpox, you see. Looky here, I'll tell you what to do. Don't you try to land by yourself, or you'll smash everything to pieces. You float along down about 20 miles, and you'll come to a town on the left-hand bank of the river. It will be long after sunup then, and when you ask for help, you tell them your folks are all down with chills and fever. Don't be a fool again and let people guess what is the matter. Now we're trying to do you a kindness, so you just put 20 miles between us, that's a good boy. It wouldn't do any good to land yonder where the light is. It's only a wood yard. Say, I reckon your father's poor, and I'm bound to say he's in pretty hard luck. Here, I'll put a $20 gold piece on this board, and you get it when it floats by. I feel mighty mean to leave you, but my kingdom, it won't do to fool with smallpox, don't you see?" "Hold on, Parker," says the other man. "Here's a 20 to put on the board for me. Goodbye, boy. You do as Mr. Parker told you, and you'll be all right." "That's so, my boy. Goodbye. Goodbye. If you see any runaway niggers, you get help and nab them, and you can make some money by it." "Goodbye, sir," says I. "I won't let no runaway niggers get by me if I can help it." They went off, and I got aboard the raft, feeling bad and low, because I knowed very well I had done wrong, and I see it warn't no use for me to try to learn to do right. A body that don't get started right when he's little ain't got no show. When the pinch comes, there ain't nothing to back him up and keep him to his work, and so he gets beat. Then I thought a minute, and says to myself, hold on. Suppose you'd have done right and give Jim up. Would you felt better than what you do now? No, says I. I'd feel bad. I'd feel just the same way I do now. Well then, says I, what's the use you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right and ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same? I was stuck. I couldn't answer that. So I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it, but after this always do whichever come handiest at the time. I went into the wigwam. Jim warn't there. I looked all around. He warn't anywhere. I says, Jim!
Here I is, Huck. Is he out of sight yet? Don't talk loud.
He was in the river under the stern oar with just his nose out. I told him they was out of sight, so he come aboard. He says,
I was a-listening to all the talk, and I slips into the river and was gwine to shove for shore if they come aboard. Then I was gwine to swim to the raft again when they was gone. But lawsy, how you did fool 'em, Huck. That was the smartest dodge. I tell you, child, I expect it save old Jim. Old Jim ain't gonna forget you for that, honey.
Then we talked about the money. It was a pretty good raise, $20 apiece. Jim said he could take the deck passage on a steamboat now, and the money would last us as far as we wanted to go in the Free States. He said 20 mile more warn't far for the raft to go, but he wished we was already there. Towards daybreak we tied up, and Jim was mighty particular about hiding the raft good. Then he worked all day fixing things in bundles and getting all ready to quit rafting. That night about 10, we hove in sight of the lights of a town away down in a left-hand bend. I went off in the canoe to ask about it. Pretty soon I found a man out in the river with a skiff setting a trot line. I ranged up and says, Mister, is that town Cairo?
Cairo? No, you must be a blame fool.
What town is it, mister?
If you want to know, go and find out.
If you stay here bothering around me for half a minute longer, you'll get something you won't want." I paddled to the raft. Jim was awful disappointed, but I said never mind. Cairo would be the next place, I reckoned. We passed another town before daylight, and I was going out again, but it was high ground, so I didn't go. "No high ground round Cairo," Jim said. I had forgot it. We laid up for the day on a towhead tolerable close to the left-hand bank. I'd begun to suspicion something. So did Jim. I says, "Maybe we went by Cairo in the fog that night." He says, "Don't let's talk about it, Huck. Poor niggers can't have no luck. I allus expected that rattlesnake skin warn't done with its work." "I wish I never seen that snake skin, Jim. I do wish I never laid eyes on it." "It ain't your fault, Huck. You didn't know. Don't you blame yourself about it." When it was daylight, here was the clear Ohio water inshore, sure enough, and outside was the old regular muddy. So it was all up with Cairo. We talked it all over. It wouldn't do to take to the shore. We couldn't take the raft up the stream, of course. There wasn't no way but to wait for dark and start back in the canoe and take the chances. So we slept all day amongst the cottonwood thicket, so as to be fresh for the work. And when we went back to the raft about dark, the canoe was gone. We didn't say a word for a good while. There wasn't anything to say. We both knowed well enough that it was some more work of the rattlesnake skin, so what was the use to talk about it? It would only look like we was finding fault, and that would be bound to fetch more bad luck, and keep on fetching it too, till we knowed enough to keep still. By and by we talked about what we better do, and found there wa'n't no way but just to go along down with the raft till we got a chance to buy a canoe to go back in. We weren't going to borrow it when there weren't anybody around, the way Pap would do, for that might set people after us. So we shoved out after dark on the raft. Anybody that don't believe yet that it's foolishness to handle a little snakeskin, after all that snakeskin done for us, will believe it now if they read on and see what more it done for us. The place to buy canoes is off of rafts laying up at shore. But we didn't see no rafts laying up, so we went along during 3 hours and more. Well, the night got gray and rather thick, which is the next meanest thing to fog. You can't tell the shape of the river, and you can't see no distance. It got to be very late and still, and then along comes a steamboat up the river. We lit the lantern and judged she would see it. Upstream boats don't generally come close to us. They go out and follow the bars and hunt for easy water under the reefs. But nights like this, they bull right up the channel against the whole river. We could hear her pounding along. We didn't see her good till she was close. She aimed right for us. Often they do that and try to see how close they can come without touching. Sometimes the wheel bites off a sweep, and then the pilot sticks his head out and laughs and thinks he's mighty smart. Well, here she comes, and we said she was going to try and shave us, but she didn't seem to be shearing off a bit. She was a big one. And she was coming in a hurry, too, looking like a black cloud with rows of glowworms around her. But all of a sudden she bulged out, big and scary, with a long row of wide-open furnace doors shining like red-hot teeth, and her monstrous bows and guards hanging right above us. There was a yell at us, and a jingling of bells to stop the engines, a powwow of cussing, and whistling of steam, and as Jim went overboard on one side and I on the other, she comes smashing straight through the raft. I dived, and I aimed to find the bottom, too, for a 30-foot wheel had got to go over me, and I wanted it to have plenty of room. I could always stay under water a minute. This time I reckon I stayed under a minute and a half. Then I bounced for the top in a hurry, for I was nearly busting. I popped out to my armpits and blowed the water out of my nose and puffed a bit. Of course there was a booming current, and of course that boat started her engines again 10 seconds after she stopped them. Boy, they never cared much for raftsmen, for now she was churning along up the river, out of sight in the thick weather, though I could hear her. I sung out for Jim about a dozen times, but I didn't get any answer, so I grabbed a plank that touched me while I was treading water and struck out for shore, shoving it ahead of me. But I made out to see that the drift of the current was towards the left-hand shore, which meant that I was in a crossing, so I changed off and went that way. It was one of these long, slanting 2-mile crossings, so I was a good long time in getting over. I made a safe landing and clumb up the bank. I couldn't see but a little ways, but I went poking along over rough ground for a quarter of a mile or more, and then I run across a big, old-fashioned double log house before I noticed it. I was going to rush by and get away, but a lot of dogs jumped out and went to howling and barking at me, and I knew better than to move another peg. End of chapter. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 17. In about a minute, somebody spoke out of a window without putting his head out and says, "Be done, boys. Who's there?" I says, "It's me." "Who's me?" "George Jackson, sir." "What do you want?" "I don't want nothing, sir. I only want to go along by, but the dogs won't let me." "What are you prowling around here this time of night for, hey?" "I warn't prowling around, sir. I fell overboard off of the steamboat." "Oh, you did you? Strike a light there, somebody. What did you say your name was?" "George Jackson, sir. I'm only a boy." "Look here, if you're telling the truth, you needn't be afraid. Nobody'll hurt you. But don't try to budge. Stand right where you are. Rouse out Bob and Tom, some of you, and fetch the guns. George Jackson, is there anybody with you?" "No, sir, nobody." I heard the people stirring around in the house now and see a light. The man sung out, "Snatch that light away, Betsy, you old fool. Ain't you got any sense? Put it on the floor behind the front door. Bob, if you and Tom are ready, take your places." "All ready." "Now, George Jackson, do you know the Shepherdsons?" "No, sir. I've never heard of them." "Well, that may be so, and it mayn't. Now, all ready. Step forward, George Jackson. And mind, don't you hurry. Come mighty slow. If there's anybody with you, let him keep back. If he shows himself, he'll be shot. Come along now. Come slow. Push the door open yourself, just enough to squeeze in, do you hear?" I didn't hurry. I couldn't if I wanted to. I took one slow step at a time, and there warn't a sound, only I thought I could hear my heart. The dogs were as still as the humans, but they followed a little behind me. When I got to the 3 log doorsteps, I heard them unlocking and unbarring and unbolting. I put my hand on the door and pushed it a little more, till somebody said, "There, that's enough. Put your head in." I done it, but I judged they would take it off. The candle was on the floor, and there they all was, and looking at me, and me at them, for about a quarter of a minute. 3 big men with guns pointed at me, which made me wince, I tell you. Oldest, gray and about 60, the other 2 30 or more, all of them fine and handsome, and the sweetest old gray-haired lady, and back of her 2 young women which I couldn't see right well. The old gentleman says, "There, I reckon it's all right. Come in." As soon as I was in, the old gentleman he locked the door and barred it and bolted it, and told the young men to come in with their guns, and they all went in a big parlor that had a new rag carpet on the floor, and got together in a corner that was out of the range of the front windows. There warn't none on the side. They held the candle and took a good look at me, and all said, "Why, he ain't a Shepherdson. No, there ain't any Shepherdson about him." Then the old man said he hoped I wouldn't mind being searched for arms, because he didn't mean no harm by it. It was only to make sure. But he didn't pry into my pockets, but only felt outside with his hands and said it was all right. He told me to make myself easy and at home and tell me all about myself. But the old lady says, "Why, bless you, Saul, the poor thing's as wet as he can be. And don't you reckon it may be he's hungry?" "True for you, Rachel, I forgot." So the old lady says, "Betsy," this was a nigger woman, "you fly around and get him something to eat as quick as you can, poor thing. And one of you girls go and wake up Buck and tell him, oh, here he is himself. Buck, take this little stranger and get the wet clothes off of him and dress him up in some of yours that's dry." Buck looked about as old as me, 13 or 14 or along there, although he's a little bigger than me. He hadn't on anything but a shirt, and he was very frowsy-headed. He came in gapping and digging one fist into his eyes, and he was dragging a gun along with the other one. He says, "Ain't there no Shepherdsons around?" They said no, 'twas a false alarm. "Well," he says, "if there'd have been some, I reckon I'd have got one." They all laughed, and Bob says, "Why, Buck, they might have scalped us all. You've been so slow in coming." "Well, nobody come after me, and it ain't right I'm always kept down. I don't get no show." "Never mind, Buck, my boy," says the old man. "You'll have show enough, all in good time. Don't you fret about that. Go 'long with you now, and do as your mother told you." When we got upstairs to his room, he got me a coarse shirt and a roundabout and pants of his, and I put them on. While I was at it, he asked me what my name was, but before I could tell him, he started to tell me about a blue jay and a young rabbit he had catched on the woods day before yesterday, and he asked me where Moses was when the candle went out. I said I didn't know. I hadn't heard about it before, no way. "Well, guess," he says. "How am I going to guess," says I, "when I never heard tell of it before?" "But you can guess, can't you? It's just as easy." "Which candle?" I says. "Why, any candle," he says. "I don't know where he was," says I. "Where was he?" "Why, he was in the dark, that's where he was." "Well, if you knowed where he was, what did you ask me for?" "Why, blame it, it's a riddle, don't you see? Say, how long are you going to stay there? You got to stay always. We can just have booming times. They don't have no school now. Do you own a dog? I got a dog. He'll go in the river and bring out chips that you throw in. Do you like to comb up Sundays and all that kind of foolishness? You bet I don't, but Ma, she makes me. Confound these old britches. I reckon I'd better put 'em on, but I'd rather not. It's so warm. Are you all ready? All right. Come along, old hoss." Cold corn pone, cold corned beef, butter and buttermilk, that is what they had for me down there, and there ain't nothing better that ever I've come across yet. Buck and his ma and all of 'em smoked cob pipes, except the nigger woman, which was gone, and the two young women. They all smoked and talked, and I eat and talked. The young women had quilts around them and their hair down their backs. They all asked me questions, and I told them how Pap and me and all the family was living on a little farm down at the bottom of Arkansas, and my sister Mary Ann run off and got married and never was heard of no more. And Bill went to hunt them, and he warn't heard of no more. And Tom and Mort died, and then there warn't nobody but just me and Pap left. He was just trimmed down to nothing on account of his troubles, so when he died I took what there was left, because the farm didn't belong to us, started up the river, deck passage, and fell overboard, and that was how I come to be here. So they said I could have a home there as long as I wanted it. Then it was most daylight, and everybody went to bed, and I went to bed with Buck. And when I waked up in the morning, drat it all, I had forgot what my name was. So I laid there about an hour trying to think, and when Buck waked up, I says,
Can you spell, Buck?"
"Yes," he says.
"I bet you can't spell my name," says I.
"I bet you what you dare I can," says he.
"All right," says I. "Go ahead."
George Jackson. There now, he says.
"Well," says I, "you done it, but I didn't think you could. It ain't no slouch of a name to spell, right off without studying." I set it down private because somebody might want me to spell it next, and so I wanted to be handy with it and rattle it off just like I was used to it. It was a mighty nice family, and a mighty nice house, too. I hadn't seen no house out in the country before that was so nice and had so much style. It didn't have an iron latch on the front door, nor a wooden one with a buckskin string, but a brass knob to turn, same as houses in town. There warn't no bed in the parlor, nor a sign of a bed, but heaps of parlors in towns has beds in 'em. There was a big fireplace that was bricked on the bottom, and the bricks was kept clean and red by pouring water on them and scrubbing them with another brick. Sometimes they wash 'em over with red water paint that they call Spanish brown, same as they do in town. They had big brass dog irons that could hold up a saw log. There was a clock on the middle of the mantelpiece with a picture of a town painted on the bottom half of the glass front, and a round place in the middle of it for the sun, and you could see the pendulum swinging behind it. It was beautiful to hear that clock tick, and sometimes when one of these peddlers had been along and scoured her up and got her in good shape, she would start in and strike 150 before she got tuckered out. They wouldn't took any money for her. Well, there was a big outlandish parrot on each side of the clock, made out of something like chalk, and painted up gaudy. By one of the parrots was a cat made of crockery, and a crockery dog by the other, and when you pressed down on them they squeaked, but didn't open their mouths nor look different nor interested. They squeaked through underneath. There was a couple of big wild turkey wing fans spread out behind these things. On the table in the middle of the room was a kind of a lovely crockery basket that had apples and oranges and peaches and grapes piled up in it, which was much redder and yellower and prettier than real ones is, but they weren't real because you could see there was pieces that got chipped off and showed the white chalk, or whatever it was, underneath. This table had a cover made out of a beautiful oilcloth with a red and blue spread eagle painted on it, and a painted border all around. It come all the way from Philadelphia, they said. There was some books, too, piled up perfectly exact on each corner of the table. One was a big family Bible full of pictures. One was Pilgrim's Progress, about a man that left his family. It didn't say why. I read considerable in it now and then. The statements was interesting but tough. Another was Friendship's Offering, full of beautiful stuff and poetry, but I didn't read the poetry. Another was Henry Clay's Speeches, and another was Dr. Gunn's Family Medicine, which told you all about what to do if a body was sick or dead. There was a hymn book and a lot of other books, and there was nice split-bottom chairs, and perfectly sound, too, not bagged down in the middle and busted like an old basket. They had pictures hung on the walls, mainly Washingtons and Lafayettes, and battles, and Highland Marys, and one called Signing the Declaration. There were some that they called crayons, which one of the daughters which was dead made her own self when she was only 15 years old. They was different from any pictures I ever see before, blacker mostly than is common. One was a woman in a slim black dress, belted small under the armpits, with bulges like a cabbage in the middle of the sleeves, and a large black scoop shovel bonnet with a black veil, and white slim ankles crossed about with black tape, and very wee black slippers, like a chisel, and she was leaning pensive on a tombstone on her right elbow, under a weeping willow, and her other hand hanging down her side holding a white handkerchief and a reticule, and underneath the picture it said, shall I never see thee more, alas. Another one was a young lady with her hair all combed up straight to the top of her head and knotted there in front of a comb like a chairback, and she was crying into a handkerchief and had a dead bird laying on its back in her other hand with its heels up. And underneath the picture it said, I shall never hear thy sweet chirrup more, alas. And there was one where a young lady was at a window looking up at the moon, and tears running down her cheeks, and she had an open letter in one hand with black sealing wax showing on one edge of it, and she was mashing a locket with a chain to it against her mouth. And underneath the picture it said, And art thou gone? Yes, thou art gone, alas. And these was all nice pictures, I reckon, but I didn't somehow seem to take to them, because if ever I was down a little, they always give me the fan-tods. Everybody was sorry she died, because she had laid out a lot more of these pictures to do, and a body could see by what she had done what they had lost. But I reckoned that with her disposition she was having a better time in the graveyard. She was at work on what they said was her greatest picture when she took sick, and every day and every night it was her prayer to be allowed to live till she got it done, but she never got the chance. It was a picture of a young woman in a long white gown, standing on the rail of a bridge all ready to jump off, with her hair all down her back, and looking up to the moon, and with the tears running down her face, and she had 2 arms folded across her breast, and 2 arms stretched out in front, and 2 more reaching up towards the moon, and the idea was to see which pair would look best, and then scratch out all the other arms. But, as I was saying, she died before she got her mind made up, and now they kept this picture over the head of the bed in her room, and every time her birthday come they hung flowers on it. Other times it was hid with a little curtain. The young woman in the picture had a kind of a nice sweet face, but there was so many arms that made her look too spidery, it seemed to me. This young girl kept a scrapbook while she was alive, and used to paste obituaries and accidents and cases of patient suffering in it out of the Presbyterian Observer, and write poetry after them out of her own head. It was very good poetry. This is what she wrote down about a boy by the name of Stephen Dowling Box, that fell down a well and was drowned. Ode to Stephen Dowling Box, deceased. And did young Stephen sicken? And did young Stephen die? And did the sad hearts thicken? And did the mourners cry? No, such was not the face of young Stephen Dowling Bots, though sad hearts round him thickened. 'Twas not from sickness shots. No whooping cough did rack his frame, nor measles drear with spots. Not these impaired the sacred name of Stephen Dowling Bots. Despised love struck not with woe that head of curly locks, nor stomach troubles laid him low, young Stephen Dowling Bots. Oh no, then list with tearful eye, whilst I his fate do tell. His soul did from this cold world fly, by falling down a well. They got him out and emptied him. Alas, it was too late. His spirit was gone for to sport aloft in the realms of the good and great. If Emmeline Grangerford could make poetry like that before she was 14, there ain't no telling what she could have done by and by. Buck said she could rattle off poetry like nothing. She didn't ever have to stop to think. He said she would slap down a line, and if she couldn't find anything to rhyme with it, would just scratch it out and slap down another one and go ahead. She warn't particular. She could write about anything you choose to give her to write about, just so it was sadful. Every time a man died, or a woman died, or a child died, she would be on hand with her tribute before he was cold. She called them tributes. The neighbors said it was the doctor first, then Emmeline, then the undertaker. The undertaker never got in ahead of Emmeline but once, and then she hung fire on a rhyme for the dead person's name, which was Whistler. She warn't ever the same after that. She never complained, but she kind of pined away and did not live long. Poor thing, many's the time I made myself go up to the little room that used to be hers and get out her poor old scrapbook and read in it when her pictures had been aggravating me and I had soured on her a little. I liked all that family, dead ones and all, and weren't going to let anything come between us. Poor Emmeline made poetry about all the dead people when she was alive, and it didn't seem right that there weren't nobody to make some about her now she was gone. So I tried to sweat out a verse or two myself, but I couldn't seem to make it go somehow. They kept Emmeline's room trim and nice, and all the things fixed in it just the way she liked to have them when she was alive, and nobody ever slept there. The old lady took care of the room herself, though there was plenty of niggers, and she sewed there a good deal and read her Bible there mostly. Well, as I was going to say about the parlor, there was beautiful curtains on the windows, white, with pictures painted on them of castles with vines all down the walls, and cattle coming down to drink. There was a little old piano, too, that had tin pans in it, I reckon, and nothing was ever so lovely as to hear the young ladies sing "The Last Link is Broken" and play "The Battle of Prague" on it. The walls of all the rooms was plastered, and most had carpets on the floors, and the whole house was whitewashed on the outside. It was a double house, and the big open place betwixt them was roofed and floored, and sometimes a table was set there in the middle of the day, and it was a cool, comfortable place. Nothing could be better, and weren't the cooking good, and just bushels of it, too. End of chapter.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 18.
Colonel Grangerford was a gentleman, you see. He was a gentleman all over, and so was his family. He was well born, as the saying is, and that's worth as much in a man as it is in a horse, so the widow Douglas said, and nobody ever denied that she was of the first aristocracy in our town. And Pap, he always said it too, though he warn't no more quality than a mud-cat himself. Colonel Grangerford was very tall and very slim, and had a darkish, paly complexion, not a sign of red in it anywheres. He was clean-shaved every morning all over his thin face, and he had the thinnest kind of lips, and the thinnest kind of nostrils, and a high nose, and heavy eyebrows, and the blackest kind of eyes, sunk so deep back that they seemed like they was looking out of caverns at you, as you may say. His forehead was high, and his hair was black and straight and hung to his shoulders. His hands was long and thin, and every day of his life he put on a clean shirt and a full suit from head to foot, made out of linen so white it hurt your eyes to look at it. And on Sundays he wore a blue tailcoat with brass buttons on it. He carried a mahogany cane with a silver head to it. There warn't no frivolousness about him, not a bit, and he warn't ever loud. He was as kind as he could be. You could feel that, you know, and so you had confidence. Sometimes he smiled, and it was good to see. But when he straightened himself up like a liberty pole, and the lightning begun to flicker out from under his eyebrows, you wanted to climb a tree first and find out what the matter was afterwards. He didn't ever have to tell anybody to mind their manners. Everybody was always good-mannered where he was. Everybody loved to have him around, too. He was sunshine most always. I mean, he made it seem like good weather. When he turned into a cloud bank, it was awful dark for half a minute, and that was enough. There wouldn't nothing go wrong again for a week. When him and the old lady came down in the morning, all the family got up out of their chairs and gave them good day, and didn't sit down again till they had sat down. When Tom and Bob went to the sideboard where the decanter was, and mixed a glass of bitters and handed it to him, and he held it in his hand and waited till Tom's and Bob's was mixed, and then they bowed and said, "Our duty to you, sir and madam," and they bowed the least bit in the world and said thank you. And so they drank, all three, and Bob and Tom poured a spoonful of water on the sugar and the mite of whiskey or apple brandy in the bottom of their tumblers and give it to me and Buck, and we drank to the old people too. Bob was the oldest and Tom next. Tall, beautiful men with very broad shoulders and brown faces, with long black hair and black eyes. They dressed in white linen from head to foot, like the old gentleman, and wore broad Panama hats. Then there was Miss Charlotte. She was 25 and tall and proud and grand, but as good as she could be when she weren't stirred up. But when she was, she had a look that would make you wilt in your tracks, like her father. She was beautiful. So was her sister, Miss Sophia, but it was a different kind. She was gentle and sweet like a dove, and she was only 20. Each person had their own nigger to wait on them, Buck too. My nigger had a monstrous easy time, because I weren't used to having anybody do anything for me, but Buck's was on the jump most of the time. This was all there was of the family now, but there used to be more. 3 sons, they got killed, and Emmeline that died. The old gentleman owned a lot of farms and over 100 niggers. Sometimes a stack of people would come there, horseback, from 10 or 15 miles around, and stay 5 or 6 days, and have such junketings round about and on the river, and dances and picnics in the woods daytimes, and balls at the house nights. These people was mostly kinfolks of the family. The men brought their guns with them. It was a handsome lot of quality, I tell you. There was another clan of aristocracy around there, 5 or 6 families, mostly of the name of Shepherdson. They was as high-toned and well-born and rich and grand as the tribe of Grangerfords. The Shepherdsons and Grangerfords used the same steamboat landing, which was about 2 miles above our house. So sometimes when I went up there with a lot of our folks, I used to see a lot of the Shepherdsons there on their fine horses. One day Buck and me was away out in the woods hunting and heard a horse coming. We was crossing the road. Buck says, "Quick, jump for the woods." We done it, and then peeped down the woods through the leaves. Pretty soon a splendid young man come galloping down the road, setting his horse easy and looking like a soldier. He had his gun across his pommel. I had seen him before. It was young Harney Shepherdson. I heard Buck's gun go off at my ear, and Harney's hat tumbled off from his head. He grabbed his gun and rode straight to the place where we was hid. But we didn't wait. We started through the woods on a run. The woods weren't thick, so I looked over my shoulder to dodge the bullet, and twice I seen Harney cover Buck with his gun. And then he rode away the way he come. To get his hat, I reckon, but I couldn't see. We never stopped running till we got home. The old gentleman's eyes blazed a minute. 'Twas pleasure mainly, I judged. Then his face sorta smoothed down, and he says, kinda gentle, "I don't like that shooting from behind a bush. Why didn't you step into the road, my boy?" "The Shepherdsons don't, father. They always take advantage." Miss Charlotte, she held her head up like a queen while Buck was telling his tale, and her nostrils spread and her eyes snapped. The 2 young men looked dark, but never said nothing. Miss Sophia, she turned pale, but the color come back when she found the man weren't hurt. Soon as I could get Buck down by the corn cribs under the trees by ourselves, I says, "Did you want to kill him, Buck?" "Well, I bet I did." "What did he do to you?" "Him? He never done nothing to me." "Well then, what did you want to kill him for?" "Why, nothing. Only it's on account of the feud." "What's a feud?" "Why, where was you raised? Don't you know what a feud is?" "Never heard of it before. Tell me about it." "Well," says Buck, "a feud is this way. A man has a quarrel with another man and kills him. Then that other man's brother kills him.
Then the other brothers on both sides go for one another. Then the cousins chip in, and by everybody's killed off, and there ain't no more feud. But it's kind of slow and takes a long time. Has this one been going on long, Buck? Well, I should reckon it started 30 year ago, or somewheres along there. There was trouble about something, and then a lawsuit to settle it, and the suit went agin one of the men, and so he up and shot the man that won the suit, which he would naturally do, of course. Anybody would. What was the trouble about, Buck? Land? I reckon maybe. I don't know. Well, who done the shooting? Was it a Grangerford or a Shepherdson? Laws, how do I know? It was so long ago. Don't anybody know? Oh, yes, Pa knows, I reckon, and some of the other old people, but they don't know now what the row was about in the first place. Has there been many killed, Puck? Yes, right smart chance of funerals, but they don't always kill. Paul's got a few buckshot in him, but he don't mind it 'cause he don't weigh much. Anyway, Bob's been carved up some with a bowie, and Tom's been hurt once or twice. Has anybody been killed this year, Buck? Yes, we got one, and they got one. About 3 months ago, my cousin Bud, 14-year-old, was riding through the woods on the other side of the river and didn't have no weapon with him, which was blame foolishness. And in a lonesome place, he hears a horse a-comin' behind him, and sees old Baldy Shepherdson a-linking after him with his gun in his hand and his white hair a-flying in the wind. And instead of jumping off and taking to the brush, Bud 'lowed he could outrun him. So they had it nip and tuck for 5 mile or more, the old man a-gaining all the time. So at last Bud seen it warn't any use, so he stopped and faced around so as to have the bullet holes in front, you know. The old man he rode up and shot him down. But he didn't get much chance to enjoy his luck, for inside of a week our folks laid him out. I reckon that old man was a coward, Buck. I reckon he warn't a coward. Not by a blame sight. There ain't a coward amongst them Shepherdsons, not ain't one. And there ain't no cowards amongst the Grangerfords either. Why, that old man kept up his end in a fight one day for half an hour against 3 Grangerfords, and come out winner. They was all a horseback. He lit off of his horse and got behind a little wood pile, and kept his horse before him to stop the bullets. But the Grangerfords stayed on their horses, and capered around the old man, and peppered away at him, and he peppered away at them. Him and his horse both went home pretty leaky and crippled, but the Grangerfords had to be fetched home, and one of them was dead, and another died the next day. No, sir. If a body's out hunting for cowards, he don't want to fool away any time amongst them Shepherdsons, because they don't breed any of that kind. Next Sunday we all went to church, about 3 mile, everybody a horseback. The men took their guns along, so did Buck, and kept them between their knees or stood them handy against the wall. The Shepherdsons done the same. It was pretty ornery preaching, all about brotherly love and such like tiresomeness. But everybody said it was a good sermon, and they all talked it over going home. They had such a powerful lot to say about faith and good works and free grace and pre-foredestination. I don't know what all, but it did seem to me to be one of the roughest Sundays I had run across yet. About an hour after dinner, everybody was dozing around, some in their chairs and some in their rooms. It got to be pretty dull. Buck and the dog were stretched out on the grass in the sun, sound asleep. I went up to our room and judged I would take a nap myself. I found that sweet Miss Sophia standing in her door, which was next to ours, and she took me in her room and shut the door very soft, and asked me if I liked her, and I said I did. She asked me if I would do something for her and not tell anybody, and I said I would. Then she said she'd forgot her testament and left it in the seat at church between 2 other books, and would I slip out quiet and go there and fetch it to her and not say nothing to nobody? I said I would.
So I slid out and slipped off up the road, and there warn't anybody at the church, except maybe a hog or two, for there warn't any lock on the door, and hogs likes a punchin' floor in summertime because it's cool. If you notice, most folks don't go to church only when they've got to, but a hog is different. Says I to myself, something's up. It ain't natural for a girl to be in such a sweat about a testament. So I give it a shake, and out drops a little piece of paper with 2:30 wrote on it with a pencil. I ransacked it, but I couldn't find anything else. I couldn't make anything out of that, so I put the paper in the book again, and when I got home and upstairs there was Miss Sophia in her door waiting for me. She pulled me in and shut the door. Then she looked in the testament till she found the paper, and as soon as she read it she looked glad. And before a body could think, she grabbed me and give me a squeeze, and said I was the best boy in the world and not to tell anybody. She was mighty red in the face for a minute, and her eyes lighted up, and it made her powerful pretty. I was a good deal astonished, but when I got my breath, I asked her what the paper was about, and she asked me if I'd read it. I said no, and she asked me if I could read writing, and I told her no, only coarse hand. And then she said the paper warn't anything but a bookmark to keep her place, and I might go and play now. I went off down the river, studying over this thing. Pretty soon I noticed that my nigger was following along behind. When we was out of sight of the house, he looked back and around a second, and then comes a-running and says, "Mars George, if you come down into the swamp, I'll show you a whole stack of water moccasins." Thinks I, that's mighty curious. He said that yesterday. He ought to know a body don't love water moccasins enough to go around hunting for them. What is he up to anyway? So I says, "All right, trot ahead." I followed a half a mile, and then he struck out over the swamp and waded ankle deep as much as another half mile. We come to a little flat piece of land which was dry and very thick with trees and bushes and vines, and he says, "You shove right in there just a few steps, Mars George. That's where they is. I'd seen 'em before. I don't care to see 'em no more." Then he slopped right along and went away, and pretty soon the trees hid him. I poked into the place a ways and come to a little open patch as big as a bedroom, all hung around with vines, and found a man laying there asleep, and by jings, it was my old Jim. I waked him up, and I reckon it was going to be a grand surprise to him to see me again. But it warn't. He nearly cried, he was so glad, but he warn't surprised. Said he swum along behind me that night and heard me yell every time, but dasn't answer, because he didn't want nobody to pick him up and take him into slavery again. Says he, "I got hurt a little and couldn't swim fast, so I was a considerable ways behind you towards the last. When you landed, I reckoned I could catch up with you on the land without having to shout at you, but when I see that house, I begin to go slow. I was off too fur to hear what they say to you. I was afraid of the dogs, but when it was all quiet again, I knowed you was in the house, so I struck out for the woods to wait for day. Early in the morning, some of the niggers come along, gwine to the fields, and they took me and showed me this place, where the dogs can't track me on accounts of the water, and they brings me truck to eat every night, and tells me how you's getting along." Why didn't you tell my Jack to fetch me here sooner, Jim?
"Well, 'twarn't no use to disturb you, Huck, till we could do something. But we's all right now. I've been a-buying pots and pans and vittles, as I got a chancet, and a-patching up the raft nights when—"
What raft, Jim?
"Our old raft."
You mean to say our old raft warn't smashed all to flinders?
"No, she warn't. She was tore up a good deal. One end of her was, but there warn't no great harm done, only our traps was most all lost. If we hadn't dived so deep and swum so fur under water, and the night hadn't been so dark, and we weren't so skeered and been such punkin heads, as the saying is, we'd have seen the raft. But it's just as well we didn't, 'cause now she's all fixed up again most as good as new, and we've got a new lot of stuff in the place of what was lost.
Why, how did you get hold of the raft again, Jim? Did you catch her?
How I gwinnter catch her and I out in the woods? No, some of the niggers found her ketched on a snag along here in the bend, and they hid her in a crick amongst the willers, and they was so much jawin' about which of 'em she belonged to the most that I come to hear about it purty soon, and I ups and settles the trouble by tellin' 'em she don't belong to none of 'em but to you and me. And I asked 'em if they gwine to grab a young white gentleman's property and get a hidin' for it. Then I gin 'em 10 cents apiece, and they is mighty well satisfied, and wish some more rafts had come along and make 'em rich again. They is mighty good to me, these niggers is, and whatever I wants 'em to do for me I don't have to ask 'em twice, honey. Dat Jack's a good nigger and purty smart.
Yes, he is. He ain't ever told me you was here. Told me to come, and he'd show me a lot of water moccasins. If anything happens, he ain't mixed up in it. He can say he never seen us together, and it'll be the truth. I don't want to talk much about the next day. I reckon I'll cut it pretty short. I waked up about dawn and was a-going to turn over and go to sleep again when I noticed how still it was. Didn't seem to be anybody stirring. That warn't usual. Next, I noticed that Buck was up and gone. Well, I gets up a-wondering and goes downstairs. Nobody around. Everything is still as a mouse. Just the same outside. Thinks I, what does it mean? Down by the woodpile, I comes across my Jack and says, "What's it all about?" Says he.
Don't you know Mars George?
"No," says I don't.
Well den, Miss Sophia's run off. 'Deed she has. She run off in the night sometime. Nobody don't know jest when. Run off to get married to that young Harney Shepherdson, you know. Leastwise, so they spec. The family found it out about half an hour ago, maybe a little more, and I tell you, they warn't no time's loss. Such another hurrying up guns and hosses you never see. The women folks is gone for to stir up the relations, and old Marse Saul and the boys tuck the guns and rode up the river road for to try and catch that young man and kill him before he can get across the river with Miss Sophia. I reckon they's going to be mighty rough times.
Buck went off without waking me up.
Well, I reckon he did. They weren't going to mix you up in it. Mars Buck, he loaded up his gun and 'lowed he's going to fetch home a Shepherdson or bust. Well, there'll be plenty of 'em there, I reckon, and you bet you he'll fetch one if he gets a chance. I took up the river road as hard as I could get. By and by I began to hear guns a good ways off. When I come inside of the log store on the woodpile where the steamboats lands, I worked along under the trees and brush till I got to a good place, and then I clumb up into the forks of a cottonwood that was out of reach and watched. There was a wood rank 4 foot high a little ways in front of the tree, and first I was going to hide behind that, but maybe it was luckier I didn't. There was 4 or 5 men cavorting around on their horses in the open place before the log store, cussing and yelling and trying to get at a couple of young chaps that was behind the wood rank alongside of the steamboat landing, but they couldn't come it. Every time one of them showed himself on the river side of the woodpile, he got shot at. The 2 boys were squatting back to back behind the pile so they could watch both ways. By and by, the men stopped cavorting around and yelling. They started riding towards the store. Then up gets one of the boys, draws a steady bead over the wood rank, and drops one of them out of his saddle. All the men jumped off their horses and grabbed the hurt one and started to carry him to the store. In that minute, the 2 boys started on the run. They got halfway to the tree I was in before the men noticed. Then the men see them,
and jumped on their horses and took out after 'em. They gained on the boys, but it didn't do no good. The boys had too good a start. They got to the woodpile that was in front of my tree and slipped in behind it, and so they had the bulge on the men again. One of the boys was Buck, and the other was a slim young chap about 19 years old. Men ripped around a while and then rode away. As soon as they was out of sight, I sung out to Buck and told him. He didn't know what to make of my voice coming out of the tree at first. He was awful surprised. He told me to watch out sharp and let him know when the men come in sight again. Said they was up to some devilment or other. Couldn't be gone long. I wished I was out of that tree, but I dasn't come down. Buck begun to cry and rip, and allowed that him and his cousin Joe, that was the other young chap, would make up for this day yet. He said his father and his 2 brothers was killed, and 2 or 3 of the enemy. Said the Shepherdsons laid for them in ambush. Buck said his father and brothers ought to have waited for their relations. The Shepherdsons was too strong for them. I asked him what was become of young Harney and Miss Sophia. He said they got across the river and was safe. I was glad of that. But the way Buck did take on, because he didn't manage to kill Harney that day he shot at him, I ain't ever heard anything like it. All of a sudden, bang, 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 goes 3 or 4 guns. The men had slipped around through the woods and come in from behind without their horses. The boys jumped for the river, both of them hurt, and as they swum down the current, the men run along the bank, shooting at them and singing out, "Kill them! Kill them!" It made me so sick I most fell out of the tree. I ain't a-going to tell all that happened. It would make me sick again if I was to do that. I wished I hadn't ever come ashore that night to see such things. I ain't ever going to get shut of them. Lots of times I dream about them. I stayed in the tree till it begun to get dark, afraid to come down. Sometimes I heard guns away off in the woods, and twice I seen little gangs of men gallop past the log store with guns, so I reckoned the trouble was still a-going on. I was mighty downhearted, so I made up my mind I wouldn't ever go near that house again, because I reckoned I was to blame somehow. I judged that that piece of paper meant that Miss Sophia was to meet Harney somewheres at 2:30 and run off. And I judged I ought to have told her father about that paper and the curious way she acted, and then maybe he would have locked her up, and this awful mess wouldn't ever happened. When I got down out of the tree, I crept along down the riverbank a piece and found the 2 bodies laying in the edge of the water, and tugged at them till I got them ashore. Then I covered up their faces and got away as quick as I could. I cried a little when I was covering up Buck's face, for he was mighty good to me. It was just dark now. I never went near the house, but struck through the woods and made for the swamp. Jim warn't on his island, so I tramped off in a hurry for the crick and crowded through the willows, red hot to jump aboard and get out of that awful country. The raft was gone. My souls, but I was scared. I couldn't get my breath for most a minute. Then I raised a yell. A voice not 25 foot from me says, "Good land, that you, honey? Don't make no noise." It was Jim's voice. Nothing ever sounded so good before. I run along the bank a piece and got aboard, and Jim he grabbed me and hugged me. He was so glad to see me. He says, "Laws bless you, child. I was right down sure you's dead again. Jack's been here. He say he reckon you's been shot, 'cause you didn't come home no more. And I's just this minute a-starting to raft down towards the mouth of the crick, so as be all ready for to shove out and leave soon as Jack comes again and tells me for certain you is dead. Lawsy, I's mighty glad to get you back again, honey." I says, "All right, that's mighty good. They won't find me, and they'll think I've been killed and floated down the river. There's something up there that'll help them think so. So don't you lose no time, Jim, but just shove off for the big water as fast as ever you can." I never felt easy till the raft was 2 miles below there and out in the middle of the Mississippi. Then we hung up our signal lantern and judged that we was free and safe once more. I hadn't had a bite to eat since yesterday, so Jim he got out some corn dodgers and buttermilk and pork and cabbage and greens. There ain't nothing in the world so good when it's cooked right. And whilst I eat my supper, we talked and had a good time. I was powerful glad to get away from the feuds, and so was Jim to get away from the swamp. We said there warn't no home like a raft after all. Other places do seem so cramped up and smothery, but a raft don't. You feel mighty free and easy and comfortable on a raft. End of chapter.